Have you ever thought about what you would do if, all of a sudden, everything and everyone you trusted turned their backs on you? Sometimes the biggest threat is not in the unknown, but within your own family. I never thought that a simple invitation to an event would change the course of my entire day, but I still remember the smell of the office, the fake smiles, the silence that made everything clear. 6 years ago, I lost my millionaire fiancé to my own sister, and in that moment, everything that seemed right fell apart. At my mother's funeral, I had to face my past head-on, looking into the eyes of the person who betrayed me, while the rest of the family pretended not to see anything. I won't hide it. There was anger, shame, and a desire to disappear. But for you to understand what brought me to that wake, I need to tell you what my life was like before that day, and why nothing was ever the same again. My name is Elena Turner, and I was born in Evanston, Illinois, on July 3, 1995. I grew up hearing that family was everything, but the reality was always more complicated than any story my mother would tell at dinner. The first memory that comes to mind is the day I turned 10 in the blue house on Tobias Barreto Street. My mother, Helena, always said that family life was the greatest treasure anyone could have, but inside that house, everything was different from what you saw in the framed photos. My father, Renato, spent most of his days involved in legal matters at the municipal court. Vivian and I shared the same room, with a single bed on each side and a closet divided in half. Even the space was a source of contention. Vivian was 2 years younger. Her birthday was on August 20th, and she had a habit of stealing my things: books, bracelets, even pieces of my school uniform. When I complained, my mother said it was nonsense. But there, sooner or later, we learned that those who don't set limits end up disappearing. My parents had the classic suburban middle-class routine: weekends at neighbors' barbecues, quick trips to Lake Michigan in the summer, silent fights at the dinner table, no one saying what they really felt. I liked basketball. I even made the high school team in 2010, and to this day I remember the smell of the court, the sound of the ball hitting the floor, the electronic scoreboard flashing after practice. Vivian was the exemplary daughter at the piano, collecting medals and praise from relatives, while I sought recognition outside the home. The school principal, Mrs. Cunningham, always said that I had leadership skills, but inside my own family, there was no room for that. Every small victory became a reason for comparison. On October 24, 2015, I graduated from Northwestern University with a degree in marketing. I interned at Zephyr Digital, a small agency with demanding clients. I learned the hard way about metrics, presentations, long meetings, and all that pressure to deliver results. I got my first raise after 4 months. Nothing life-changing, but it was there that I understood that, in the adult world, everything revolved around goals, demands, and recognition. My boss, Alan Pierce, didn't accept excuses. When my laptop froze in the middle of a presentation, my hands would sweat, hoping no one would notice how nervous I was. At 24 years old, in 2019, my life was all about work. I started attending industry events, such as the American Marketing Association conference in downtown Chicago in March. It was at this event that I met Dylan. He gave a talk about raising funds for startups. But unlike the others, he explained each concept in a straightforward way so that anyone could understand, even those who had never heard of equity or valuation. I left that talk wanting to learn more, and I had no idea how much this would change everything. Dylan was 3 years older and had founded VantageX, a technology company that was always appearing on lists of promising talent in the industry. Our first meeting was at a coffee shop called Oak and Ash on Clark Street. It was a small place with a strong smell of coffee and old wooden tables. He wore an old digital watch which stood out from the rest of him, which was always impeccable. We talked about work, travel, childhood, and bad movies from the 1990s. I didn't trust anyone easily, but Dylan became the reference for everything I wanted: security, recognition, and a promising future. Vivian, even though she lived far away, continued to be the family's benchmark. Every achievement of mine became a competition. Vivian has done better. Vivian already knew that. I told myself that I didn't care, but each comment was a reminder that, I was always being measured by the yardstick of others. And it was at this pace that everything changed. The marriage proposal came on December 21st, 2020, in front of the Ferris wheel at Navy Pier in Chicago, with the cold wind biting my face and a simple ring taken from my coat pocket. I accepted immediately, feeling that I had finally won a competition that I didn't even want to enter. But looking back, I realized that that feeling of victory was never real. I thought I was building the right life, but within my family, happiness was always just a facade. What happened next? No one could have predicted. I could never figure out exactly what was going on in Vivian's head, but some things were obvious. She had observed me in a strange way since childhood, always noticing my gestures, the clothes I wore, the way I spoke. At first, I thought it was just a sisterly tantrum, that thing of wanting to compete even at breakfast, but little by little it became clear that there was more to it. After I got engaged to Dylan, the frequency with which she sent me messages increased. She wanted to know details about everything, from how we met to how much he earned per month. At first, I responded calmly, thinking it was just curiosity, but I noticed that each response turned into ammunition for some passive-aggressive comment. "Funny how lucky you were," she said once, looking at her cell phone and pretending not to be indirect. Another day, when I showed her the wedding invitation, she made a point of comparing it to her cousin Lisa's, who had gotten married at the Waldorf Astoria the year before. If I commented on a restaurant, she would look for a bad review to throw at the group. If I talked about work, she would remember some award she had won for piano, so she could nip me in the bud. It was never overt, never blatant, but it was there, all the time, as if she were measuring every step I took. It was a Sunday, April 25th, 2021, when we met at my mother's house for lunch. Vivian spent half the afternoon sitting at the dining table, watching me talk to Dylan, without saying a word, just observing every smile, every touch. When my mother asked about the engagement, Vivian made a point of pointing out that she didn't understand what I saw in someone in the technology industry, because, according to her, these people only care about money. I laughed and tried to change the subject, but the atmosphere became awkward. I remember that same day, she kept fiddling with the ring on my finger, as if she wanted to see it up close, and then commented, almost in a whisper, that she knew a jewelry store with more authentic stones. On my 26th birthday, she showed up with a gift wrapped in gold paper. When I opened it, it was a book about modern relationships, with an ambiguous dedication, "So that you never settle for less." My boyfriend laughed, saying it was a sisterly teasing, but I spent the rest of the day wondering what it meant. Vivian always had this talent for camouflaging venom with compliments, and the closer my wedding got, the more she showed up, called, and texted. Suddenly, she suggested honeymoon destinations, asked about suppliers, and wanted to know if I didn't think it was risky to trust someone I'd only known for 2.5 years. One night, she even tried to convince me to postpone the date because Mercury retrograde could mess with the energy of the event. I never cared about such things, but it made me uneasy, not because of the advice, but because of the almost authoritarian tone she used. In September of 2021, I went to her apartment to deliver some wedding invitations. The apartment was smaller than mine, but everything was impeccable. Fresh flowers, pictures lined up, crystal glasses on the table. Vivian served me almost cold coffee, and during the conversation, I noticed that every time I mentioned Dylan, she would change the subject or make a subtle joke. But there was also that kind of curiosity that goes beyond the limit. She would ask me personal details like, "Do you really trust him to share your life with?" Or, "Have you ever thought that he might not be all that he seems?" And she would always look at me as if she knew something I didn't. I pretended not to notice, preferring to believe that it was all just my own exaggeration. But the truth is that this feeling only grew. At work, colleagues had already warned me that siblings could be competitive. But honestly, I never imagined that it could reach this level between sisters. In October of that year, I went to the mall to buy my wedding dress and took Vivian with me. Instead of helping, she pointed out flaws in everything. The fabric was too simple. The style didn't flatter my body. The price was absurd. When I found a dress that I liked, she said with a smile on her face, that it probably wasn't my style, and that maybe I should try something less basic. At the end of the day, I left there tired, as if each choice I made was always insufficient. When I told my mother, she said that it was just jealousy from a younger sister, but I was the one who felt that discomfort. Vivian never needed to yell to be cruel, and that was the worst part. I ignored everything and continued with the preparations, but over time, even Dylan began to notice. One day after dinner, he commented that Vivian was too nice when he was around, but cold to me behind the scenes. He didn't understand. He thought it was a family thing, but I was already starting to suspect. In November, 40 days before the wedding, I noticed that Vivian no longer responded to my messages with as much interest. When we met, she avoided talking about the subject, changed the subject, but her gaze remained the same. That way of someone who is calculating every word, every step, as if she were waiting to act. I pretended not to care, but deep down, something told me that my happiness had an expiration date, and I didn't know it yet. I thought I knew what fear was, until that day. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt this discomfort? That feeling that someone close to you is always silently competing, ready to knock you down at your most vulnerable moment? Write in the comments what was the worst sign you ever noticed in a relationship like this, or declare without fear, I see beyond appearances. I want to see who would have the courage to act before the worst happened. And that was just the first sign that everything was about to turn upside down. I remember the overcast sky, the gray city, and the icy wind of the late afternoon biting my skin as I climbed the stairs of the Vantage X building on that Friday, November 19th, 2021. It was almost 6:40 at night. I was holding a small box with the gift I had bought for Dylan that morning, a digital photo frame with our photos from the last 2 years already saved in its memory, ready to give a personal touch to his office. The elevator took almost 5 minutes to reach the 12th floor, and during that ride, I went over in my head everything I wanted to say when I gave him the gift. I had planned to surprise him, to show him that there was still room for simple gestures in the midst of that heavy routine of meetings, spreadsheets, and never-ending phone calls. As soon as I entered the hallway, I noticed that the lights in the main office were still on, even though most people had already left for work. I walked past the kitchen, where the smell of reheated coffee and forgotten cookies was the same as always, and headed toward the glass door with the CEO plaque. I took a deep breath, checked to see if the bow on the gift was intact, and opened the door slowly, expecting to hear his voice on the phone or find a colleague laughing at the bad jokes he always made on Fridays. What I found was something else. They were there, sitting on the couch by the window, laughing, glued to each other. Vivian was wearing a red dress, different from the one she had worn to work earlier, and Dylan was holding her hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They both didn't even understand when I walked in. It took me a few seconds to process what I was seeing, because the scene was so out of place that my brain didn't seem to accept it at first. There was no shouting, no scene, not even an explanation. The two of them were so involved, exchanging glances and smiles, that it took them a while to notice my presence. When they finally saw me, silence fell in an odd way. Dylan's gaze became lost, as if searching for words, and Vivian lowered her eyes, still holding his hand in her fingers. The box fell from my hand and hit the floor with a muffled noise, but no one moved. I felt my breath catch. My legs threatened to give out. All the blood seemed to have gone to my face, and I needed strength to keep from falling right there. My chest tightened so much that I had to leave. I turned around, unable to look back, and walked down the hallway without seeing anything clearly, as if I were in a tunnel. The next few minutes passed in slow motion. I remember crossing the lobby, people talking near the reception, the security guard at the door asking if everything was okay. I didn't answer anything. I walked to the parking lot with my head spinning, each step weighing as if I was carrying a bag of cement on my shoulders. I just wanted to disappear from there, to make that day disappear somehow. The box with the picture frame was forgotten on the office carpet, the photos I had selected one by one now meaningless. Inside the car, I sat in the driver's seat and stared at my hands, trying to understand where I had lost control of everything. The world seemed smaller, suffocating, as if every window in the building was watching me fail. I didn't cry. My stomach felt sick. My entire body felt cold, and I had an absurd urge to drive aimlessly through the city. The clock on the dashboard showed 7:08 at night when I managed to start the car. I remember driving aimlessly, without music, without thinking about anything properly. I spent more than 40 minutes driving around Chicago without the courage to call my mother, without wanting to answer anyone's messages. All that existed was that strange emptiness, the echo of their laughter still hammering in my head. I thought I knew what pain was, but that night taught me another kind of suffering, the kind that doesn't go away, that weighs on every breath, that leaves you feeling out of your own body. If someone had told me at that exact moment that this was just the beginning of the nightmare, I would have said that it couldn't get any worse. But I was wrong. What happened there will never fade from memory. It is impossible to go through a scene like that and pretend that nothing has changed. And those who have come this far have felt every detail as if they were living that day with me. It is part of the story. Stories like this need to be recorded, because only those who witness each fall understand the strength it takes to get up again. So leave your like, subscribe now, and stay tuned, because what comes next will go far beyond what you can imagine. The shame of going through that humiliation stuck with me for weeks, like a stain that wouldn't go away no matter how hard I tried to forget. I didn't have the courage to look anyone in the family in the eye. The following Saturday, I sat on the bed in my room, called my mother, and before I could even say anything, I broke down. She tried to reason with me, saying that every family goes through bad times, but I didn't want to hear anything that would diminish what I had seen. In 2 days, I officially canceled the wedding. I called the caterer, notified the decorator, wrote a quick email to the photographer canceling the contract. It was November 22nd, 2021, when I sent a curt message to Dylan, asking him to pick up his things from the apartment by the following night. No apology was forthcoming, no long justification, just an "okay, you can leave it," that made me feel even more disposable. I didn't want to remember anything. I deleted every photo from my phone, emptied old albums, and tore up birthday cards that had been stored in a drawer for over 5 years. Everything that smelled of the past went into a box and tossed into a corner of the closet. I even changed the background on my work laptop, as if a new image could erase that old pain. The following days were automatic. I got up early, pretended to go to the grocery store, but in reality I just walked aimlessly until I couldn't take it anymore. On a freezing Tuesday in December, I decided that I no longer wanted to live in the same city that reminded me of them. I booked a small apartment in the Wicker Park area of Chicago, 28 miles from my old address. The contract was signed on December 4th, 2021, and I only took with me 3 suitcases, the television, and the work laptop. The new apartment was 34 square meters, had a view of the parking lot, and walls so thin that I could hear my neighbor practicing scales on his violin after 10 at night. I didn't bother decorating anything. I bought a folding table and a simple chair and spent weeks sleeping on the new mattress, which was still covered in plastic. The building smelled like wet carpet that stuck to your clothes. The elevator made a high-pitched noise every time it stopped on a floor, and the lobby was monitored by old tube cameras, the kind that show images in black and white and fail when the sunlight hits too much. At first, the nights were endless. Being silent became routine. I knew exactly how many steps I took from the door to the bathroom, 11. From the window to the kitchen sink, 7. I even went 4 days without speaking to anyone, not by text message or by phone. Remote work was the only thing that got me out of bed in the morning. Online meetings took place every Monday and Thursday at 9 a.m. with the Zephyr Digital team, each on a different screen. I pretended to be busy, creating new spreadsheets just to justify the lack of results, but nothing seemed to be enough. My supervisor, Alan, noticed my discouragement and asked me a few times if I was okay. I would say that I was tired, that it was a complicated project, any excuse that would save me from having to explain. During breaks, I would stare at the ceiling, counting the cracks, watching the hand of the wall clock slowly tick by. Sometimes I would open my phone and type messages to old friends, but I never sent them. I deleted Vivian's contact, blocked her on all social media, and added Dylan's name to my email block list. Food became easy: microwave noodles, stale bread with butter, coffee warmed up from the day before. There was a week in January when I ate nothing but frozen lasagna for 6 days straight. not daring to actually cook anything. The cold in Chicago that winter was the worst it had been in 10 years, according to the news. The windows were constantly fogged up, the portable heater was no longer working, and the apartment was constantly damp. I slept in 2 shirts and 3 socks and still woke up with numb toes in the morning. At the end of February 2022, I decided to go for a walk to a bookstore on Milwaukee Avenue. I picked out a random book, sat by the window to watch the street movement, and found myself crying softly without realizing it. People were rushing by, each minding their own business, and that gave me a strange relief. It was as if I finally understood that no one was going to rescue me from that hole. The messages from my family stopped arriving, the colleagues from my old office disappeared, and all that was left were the questions that I avoided answering myself. Would I ever be able to rebuild something from that? At the time, I would have bet against it. But what happened next? No one could have predicted. Over the next few months, time began to move at a different pace. It was strange to realize, but the days stopped being as heavy as before. I slowly went back to work, accepting freelance digital marketing jobs for small businesses in the neighborhood. I received my first new contract on March 15th, 2022, for a bike shop called Urban Wheels on North Damen Avenue. The owner, Greg, needed to increase online sales and didn't understand anything about Google Ads. I put together a campaign plan, adapted banners, and explained to him the difference between paid and organic traffic. Words that, at first, sounded like another language to someone who had never had to think about them. It was a challenge, but also a kind of rescue. Each positive result was a small, almost invisible victory, but it was enough to remind me that I was still good at what I did. I forced myself to establish a routine, even though it didn't make any sense at first. I started going to work at the Octane coffee shop on Milwaukee Avenue, 2 blocks from my house. I would arrive at 8:25, order a double coffee, and sit there writing proposals until noon. The owner, Jamal, became almost like a friend, asking about my family, recommending books, and saving my order for when I was late. I started to feel like dressing up again. I bought new clothes on sale in April, even though there was no special reason. I started wearing makeup again. Nothing too much, just mascara and lipstick to hide my tired face on video calls. In May, I got 2 regular clients and started dividing my time between projects, quick Zoom meetings, and trips to the grocery store to cook real food, without resorting to the microwave every night. In early June, I attended a conference on innovation and technology applied to marketing, held at the 1871 building, that famous co-working space in the Merchandise Mart. It was there that I met Arthur. He was one of the guest speakers, but he wasn't exactly a star in the industry. He arrived wearing a light blue shirt, basic sneakers, his badge hanging crookedly, and a slightly disconcerted smile of someone who preferred to go unnoticed. He presented a panel on fintechs and artificial intelligence, talking about how the market was changing the way we invest and consume information. The most interesting thing was that he explained everything without technical terms. He talked about algorithms as if he were talking about a cake recipe, showed simple examples, and asked questions to the audience. I was in the second row, jotting down the main ideas in my cell phone's notepad. During the break, I decided to bring up a question from the panel. Arthur answered me patiently, without rushing, asking what I thought and really listening. We talked for 10 minutes about conversion metrics, but soon the conversation turned to bad TV shows and childhood curiosities. He told me that he had started investing after selling a startup for $120,000, and that he now worked helping small businesses grow. He got my contact information, suggested we meet for coffee, and I accepted. There was no forced charm, no ready-made speech, just a natural exchange that made the time pass without me noticing. The first meeting was on June 15th at Intelligentsia Coffee on Broadway. We spent almost 2 hours talking about music, trips that had been canceled due to the pandemic, and how much I missed having someone I could trust around me. With him, I didn't have to explain why I liked to stay silent sometimes, or why I avoided talking about the past. Arthur didn't ask questions that felt like interrogations, nor did he try to fix my problems. He gave me space, laughed at small things, and listened when I wanted to vent. He never said he understood my pain. He just stayed there, present. On June 25th, he invited me to a private networking event saying that I needed to feel part of the world again. I went, even though I was afraid of embarrassing myself. I met new people, exchanged business cards, and felt able to start over without carrying the same weight I had before. As time went by, our contact became closer and closer. Arthur would send me simple messages, ask if I had had lunch, send me links to podcasts about innovation, and challenge me to crossword puzzles on my cell phone. There was never any pressure. By definition, things happened slowly and respectfully. In August, he helped me put together an online portfolio, reviewing each project, correcting details that I had overlooked. He would tell me that I underestimated my own work, and when I heard that, I felt like someone was finally seeing me for real, without any pressure. The following months brought a new calm. I started to enjoy cooking again. I decorated the apartment. I bought a plant that survived for more than 3 months. I learned how to make American pancakes on Sunday mornings. I started to wake up without feeling heavy. I was able to sleep without waking up in the middle of the night missing someone. Arthur didn't change my life overnight. He just stayed by my side without demanding anything. And it was like that, without realizing it, that I saw my confidence reborn. I didn't know it, but I was about to discover that behind that calm and careful manner, there was a story linked to my past, something capable of turning my world upside down once again. When Arthur proposed, it was a cold morning on December 24th, 2022. We were in the kitchen of my apartment in Chicago, sitting at a small table with 2 plates of American pancakes, honey, and freshly brewed coffee. He didn't make a big scene, or get down on one knee, or prepare any surprises. He just took my hand, looked me in the eyes, and asked, in a way so simple that I wanted to laugh, if I wanted to marry him. It was the first time in a long time that someone had asked me a question without demanding guarantees in return. I said yes without thinking twice, and he smiled in that shy way, as if he was relieved that I didn't ask for time to think. The decision not to have a party or invite any of the family was unanimous. It was not the right atmosphere. There was no point in opening old wounds just to follow a traditional script. We reserved a room for the civil ceremony at the registry office downtown, on Clark Street. The wedding took place on January 26, 2023, at 10:30 in the morning, in front of a bald and friendly judge, and 2 witnesses who worked in the building and agreed to participate on the spot. I wore a simple dark blue dress, and he showed up in a white shirt and gray blazer. There was no music, no cake, no long promises. The judge only asked us to confirm our names, asked if it was our own will, and then declared us married. We left there laughing with a folder full of papers and the feeling that we were opening a new chapter without expecting anyone to applaud. We had lunch at Lou Malnati's, sharing a deep dish pizza, and then went for a walk along the Chicago River, looking at the mirrored buildings. Sometimes I had to touch my ring to make sure it was real. For the first time, I didn't feel rushed. It was like I had finally found the right rhythm of things, without having to prove anything to anyone. It wasn't until a few weeks later, while we were organizing documents to open a joint account, that the connection between Arthur and my past really became apparent. I knew he worked in technology investments, but I hadn't stopped to think about who his clients were. One random Sunday, he mentioned that he had closed an important deal with a logistics startup that, until 2 years earlier, had been a direct competitor of VantageX, Dylan's company. He told the story casually, as if it were just another job, but from the way he mentioned details about the sector, I realized that he understood more about that market than I could have imagined. At first, I didn't pay much attention, but the coincidences started to happen again. One day, during dinner at home, Arthur answered a call from a partner named Greg and talked about meetings with investment funds that I had heard Dylan mention at previous events. I started connecting the dots and I understood. Arthur was not only successful in the market, but had surpassed Dylan's company in the industry rankings. He didn't make a trophy out of it. He never bragged about it. He just followed his path. The strangest thing was realizing that, without planning it, I had married the man who occupied exactly the position Dylan had always dreamed of achieving. Neither of us seemed to care about it. Arthur was still dedicated to his work, and I was too busy trying to adapt to my new life to give any importance to the past. But this coincidence made me look at everything with different eyes. Instead of fear or resentment, I felt a strange relief. It was as if, finally, I could live without carrying the weight of comparisons, without having to worry about who was winning the invisible family dispute. Over the next few months, our routine became easier. We woke up early, had breakfast together, shared household chores, exchanged ideas about projects, and laughed at the little mistakes we made in our daily lives. No one expected that our marriage would work out, but for me, each week together was proof that, yes, it was possible to start over without repeating the old pains. Sometimes, at night, looking out the window at the illuminated city, I would think about how everything had changed in less than a year, from pain and shame to the beginning of a peaceful story, with room for hope and real plans. I had no idea, but as I tried to keep my life away from the past, I was about to be pulled back into the same scenario I had tried to erase. And this time, there was no way I could escape what was coming. 6 years passed faster than I could have imagined. Most of the time, my life was filled with work, projects, and the predictable rhythm of my days with Arthur. Until, on a cold February morning in 2029, I received the call I had always feared. My mother, Helena, had been hospitalized since the beginning of the month, but no one had told me how serious it was. The phone rang at 7:42, and my father, with a dry and tired voice, summed it up in a few words. "She asked to see you." I didn't ask for details. I closed my laptop, changed my clothes, and 2 hours later I was on the road, leaving Chicago behind and heading for Evanston, as if all the miles between one city and the other weren't enough to keep the past at bay. The last time I had set foot in that house was Christmas in 2023. That year, Arthur and I had spent Christmas Eve in Chicago and had only made a quick phone call to my mother. Now, as I walked into the living room, I could smell the old carpet, the cheap floral perfume she had always worn, and something that had been kept for too long. Helena was no longer as strong as she once was. She squeezed my hand, apologized for the old fights, said little, but made it clear that she wanted the family together, no matter what had happened before. She died 4 days later, on a rainy Wednesday, February 13th, without being able to see what she wanted to happen. The wake was held in the chapel attached to the municipal cemetery the following Saturday. I arrived before 9 o'clock, sitting in the back rows, observing faces I hadn't seen in almost a decade. Arthur stayed by my side the whole time, discreet, attentive. It didn't take long for me to hear the buzz at the entrance. Vivian arrived first, accompanied by Dylan. They walked down the central aisle as if they were entering a gala. Vivian was wearing a tight black dress, high heels, impeccable makeup, and a diamond ring so large that it drew attention even in the midst of mourning. Dylan was wearing a dark suit, sunglasses in his jacket pocket, and an expression of someone who knew everyone was watching. They greeted their acquaintances with cold smiles, gave hugs to the family, and when she got close to me, Vivian looked me up and down before saying a word. She didn't even try to hide it. She said, "You're still the same," in that tone of someone who needs to feel better. She didn't ask me anything about my life. She didn't want to know what had happened in the years I was away. Instead, she went on to say that life in Evanston was great, that the new house was huge, that Dylan's business was only growing, and that they were thinking about buying a house in Palm Springs. She repeated details about expensive trips, exclusive restaurants, and brands that never made sense to me. I didn't react. I just listened, trying to control the urge to leave, while she paraded her supposed successes in front of everyone. But the comparison was the real gift. Vivian blurted out a sentence that stuck in the room. "It's funny seeing you here alone, Elena. Some people are born to be extras." Everyone's eyes turned to me, waiting for an answer. I felt my face heat up, but Arthur squeezed my hand discreetly, without saying anything. Dylan, next to her, seemed bored. He wouldn't look me in the eye, just kept checking his phone, as if he wanted to be anywhere else. My aunt, sitting next to the coffin, tried to hide her embarrassment, fiddling with the tissues she was holding in her hands. I stood there, motionless, listening to every word, feeling the weight of years of disguised fighting. Vivian didn't stop. She kept talking about their achievements, the parties they threw, the money they spent, how much they learned from other people's mistakes. Anyone who knew my story knew what was going on, but no one had the courage to interrupt. I don't know how long that scene lasted. The clock on the wall read 10:50 when someone called for the ceremony to begin. Before heading into the hall, Vivian made a point of passing close to Arthur, casting a quick, assessing glance. It was only then, when their eyes met, that I realized the past hadn't finished haunting me. The reunion on those wooden benches, under the cold lights of the chapel, was just the beginning, and I had no idea what was yet to come. The atmosphere in the chapel changed completely the moment I called Arthur to stand beside me. He approached slowly, without rushing, and stood right next to me, resting his hand on my back, transmitting a calm I hadn't felt in a long time. Everyone stopped talking. The buzz, which until then had been about Vivian and Dylan's accomplishments, gave way to a heavy silence. Dylan looked up, trying to hide his discomfort, but it was impossible to hide it. The color drained from his face as he processed who was in front of him. The same Arthur who, years before, he had tried to ridicule in a business meeting. Now, in front of the entire family, it was impossible to pretend that it didn't matter. Vivian quickly realized everything. Her confident smile disappeared, as if someone had pulled the rug out from under her. She looked at Dylan, expecting some gesture, but her husband stood still, staring at Arthur as if expecting a blow. Arthur, on the other hand, just greeted her politely, using that direct tone he always had. "Hi, Dylan. Vivian." He didn't change his expression, nor did he raise his voice. It was impossible not to notice the discomfort in the room. Even my aunt, who had always prided herself on diplomacy, looked at the floor, pretending to pack her bag. There was no need to say anything else. Arthur's presence alone, right there next to me, showed everything that no one had wanted to see for years. I was no longer the quiet figure at parties, nor the sister who sat in the corner listening to other people's success stories. The previously acidic comments were left hanging in their mouths. The embarrassment was almost palpable. Vivian tried to regain control of the conversation, bringing up topics like trips to Paris and saying they had just returned from a cruise, but no one seemed interested. Dylan, who had always enjoyed being the center of attention, lost his spark. He avoided looking at Arthur, and whenever someone asked about business, he changed the subject, saying that the economy was tough and that people didn't realize how hard it was to keep a company competitive. Arthur remained calm, listening more than talking. When asked about his work, he explained it simply, without jargon, without boasting, just talking about the projects he was working on in Chicago and how he liked supporting small startups. He didn't need to say that he was successful. All he had to do was compare the way each one carried himself to see who was truly confident. The conversation changed course. In a few minutes, what had been a show of victories turned into a parade of excuses and justifications. Relatives who had always been close to Vivian began approaching me and Arthur, asking about our lives, commenting on how we had good energy. Vivian's look betrayed the anger she felt. For the first time, she was not in control of the situation. I felt a satisfaction that was hard to explain, not because I saw someone lose, but because I finally didn't carry the burden of an unfair comparison. By the end of the ceremony, the difference was clear. We walked out of the chapel side by side, unhurriedly, while the rest of the family followed behind, talking quietly. Arthur squeezed my hand tightly, without saying anything. Vivian and Dylan hurried past, not even looking back. The old theater of ostentation had fallen. For the first time, I felt that the story was no longer about them, but about the strength of having rebuilt my life, even when everyone else was against it. That night, lying in my mother's old bedroom, I realized that I didn't need a stage or applause. The life I had built with Arthur was the answer to everything they had tried to take from me. But behind that silence, there was still an unresolved secret, and I was about to discover that nothing in the family was exactly what it seemed. The end of the ceremony was interrupted by the noise of chairs being hurriedly dragged. When I least expected it, I saw my father, Renato, pale and hunched over in the armchair next to the door, trying to breathe without being able to finish a sentence. My uncles rushed to get water. My cousin called the family doctor, and, in a matter of seconds, the hall became a hustle and bustle. I stood next to him, holding his vein-marked hand, while I felt that cold panic rise up my spine. He was never one to show weakness, but in that moment, everyone saw that not even he could bear the weight of what we were going through. All I could think about was how, even after so much time and so many fights, he was the one holding the fort. And now, he was there, vulnerable, in front of everyone. When the situation calmed down and most of the people had left, I was left alone with Vivian in the kitchen of the old house. There was no more audience, no makeup, no reason to fight. I sat across from her, tired, ready to hear anything that came my way, without expecting greatness. Vivian remained silent for a few minutes, her hands clutching the ring she was wearing, as if it were capable of protecting her from what was to come. And then she broke down in a way I had never seen before. Her arrogant look was lost. "My marriage is a lie, Elena," she began, her voice low, almost hoarse. "Everything I show doesn't exist. The house is mortgaged. Dylan has been cheating on me for years, and the only thing left is the fear of being left with nothing." I didn't ask any questions, or ask for an explanation. I just stood there, listening to her list the debts, Dylan's absurd control over the money, the humiliations she hid from the entire family. I felt my old anger give way to a pity that, if I let it grow, might turn into compassion. Vivian didn't cry out loud. She just let a few tears flow, saying she couldn't stand pretending anymore. She said she didn't know how to be different, that she got used to competing, to pretending she was always on top, just so she wouldn't be forgotten. I tried to remember the last time we had spoken without venom, without measuring each word as an attack. I couldn't find any recent memories. That's when she got up and pulled out an old notebook from a drawer, its cover already worn. It was my mother's diary. I thought it was strange that she had kept it for so long, but she explained that she always opened it on nights when she couldn't sleep. We sat down together to read. Among scribbled recipes, shopping lists, and childhood memories, my mother left direct messages. "I hope that one day my daughters will put aside their pride and be able to talk like sisters, that they won't need anyone's applause to know that they are valuable." Those sentences were simple, but they weighed more than any fight. Reading that, I realized how much time we had wasted. Vivian was silent for a while, looking at the cover of the diary. "I'm going to file for divorce," she said finally. It wasn't an announcement of victory, nor a request for applause. It was just the beginning of something new, a necessary new beginning. For the first time, we really talked, without venom, without irony. We talked about what each of us felt, about what was left behind, about our fear of the future. We didn't resolve everything there, but it was clear that deep down, all that rivalry was just a reflection of the fear of losing, of the panic of not being seen. That morning, I helped Vivian pack a small suitcase with some clothes, our mother's diary, and she said she would pick up the rest of her things later. She was going to stay with a friend for a while until she could sort out the divorce paperwork. We hugged quickly, a little awkwardly, like someone who is not used to it, but who understands that from that moment on, it was no longer possible to put on any kind of mask. Before leaving, she looked at me and asked, "Do you think one day we can truly be sisters?" I told her that we were already trying, and for the first time in many years, I felt that maybe that was true. I believed that the greatest tragedies of my life had already passed, but I was wrong. I still had to face everything that the future had in store for me. Today, I look at life with different eyes. The apartment in Chicago has become cozier as the months have passed. The morning sun shines directly into the living room window, and the plant that almost died in the winter is now full of new leaves, taking over the windowsill. I am 26 weeks pregnant with Arthur, and prenatal appointments at the West Superior Clinic have become part of my routine. The doctor, Dr. Ramsey, always makes a point of asking if I am sleeping well, if I am anxious, if the baby has started to move yet. And, yes, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night feeling a mix of fear and gratitude, remembering everything I went through to get here. Arthur, with his usual calm, is the one who makes me laugh about the little insecurities of everyday life. He makes plans for the future, talks about the names he would like for his son, cooks my favorite pasta on Sundays, and puts on relaxing playlists when he sees me tired. Deep down, I realize that I would not have survived so many losses without this silent support, without someone to share the bad days, the doubts, the achievements that today seem small, but that before seemed impossible. Vivian has also become a different person. She rents a modest apartment in Ravenswood, about 40 minutes by subway from downtown. She started giving private music lessons to local children and even took a job at an instrument store. The furniture is simple. The refrigerator is almost empty at the end of the month. But she always makes a point of saying that she prefers it that way. She texts sometimes, asking how I am, sharing news, or asking for tips on how to pay the bills. She still misses a lot of things, but she no longer talks about brands, parties, or expensive trips. Today, her pride is less, and her contact is more sincere. For the first time, we don't measure who is ahead of us. We just exchange honest words without expecting anything in return. I carry the scars of that past like invisible tattoos. Every disappointment, every betrayal, every long night that I thought I couldn't handle brought me to this point. I thought the worst thing that could happen was to lose everything, but it was precisely that loss that freed me from the need to prove my worth to those who didn't want to see. The scars didn't disappear, but they learned not to hurt so much. I discovered that forgiveness doesn't serve to justify what they did to me. It serves to loosen the chains that bound me to resentment and shame. Forgiveness doesn't erase what I've experienced, but it allows me to move forward without carrying the weight that is no longer mine. Sometimes, walking down the street, I see reflections of myself in other women with tired expressions, trying to balance work, family, and broken dreams. I feel like stopping and saying that, no matter how closed the world may seem, there is always an outside waiting to be discovered. A new beginning does not come to those who remain still. It takes courage to give up control, to admit that we do not have all the answers and that starting over means throwing ourselves into the dark, believing that sooner or later some light will appear. If someone were to ask me today what I learned from all of this, I would say that losing people, losing money, losing status, even losing the illusion of who I was what gave me room to grow. That no one needs to spend their life trying to be accepted, carrying guilt for choices that weren't theirs. That scars aren't failures, they're survival. The past will never truly disappear, but now I can look back without fear, with respect for my own failures. And every step forward is a reminder that no new beginning happens without courage, and that the deepest freedom is knowing that sometimes losing is the only real way to truly find yourself. Now I want to hear from you. Would you have had the courage to break with everything and start over, even knowing that the price would be losing what you thought was your own life? Write in the comments, "I choose to start over." I want to see who here really faces the truth head-on, because there is no more room for excuses, doubts, or regrets. At this point, you have already felt the weight of each choice. You have already walked through each scar with me. And you know, as well as I do, that rebirth requires facing your ghosts head-on. This story has affected you, and I know this, because there are no neutral spectators here. Only those who went all the way, felt the impact, and understood that deep down, surviving is not about moving forward in the same way, but changing so as to never go back. Those who have come this far are part of a rare group, people who do not hide from what they feel, who know that forgiveness and starting over are never easy paths, but are the only ones that truly set you free. That's why you can't just watch. You have to be present. Make your voice heard. Comment, because stories like this cannot be swallowed up by silence. You are already part of this community. Here, each story is a call to those who want more from life, more truth, more courage, more transformation. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications. Don't put it off, because each new story that arrives here has the power to turn everything you thought about limits, pain, forgiveness, and victory upside down. Sharing this video is more than a gesture. It is a warning to the world that no one needs to live stuck in the past. And let me tell you right now, what you just saw is just the beginning. What awaits you now will challenge everything you think you know about how far someone can go to survive and change their life. Click on the next video, it's already on the screen, and come and find out why, for those who truly want to be reborn. Each story is just the first step.